This was written in 2013, so it was 10 years ago or more. But it was a study conducted by the Center of Neuroscience in the University of Colorado, Boulder, because we don't want to claim Denver on this one. Go Denver. The emotional effects of forced exercise versus voluntary exercise on anxiety and emotional resilience is what the study was about. And that sounds good, right? Well, this study involved adult rats who were placed in 4 categories. There were the ones that could get on their exercise wheel and run as much as they want for as long as they want and do whatever they want. They were in complete control of what they wanted to do. But then they brought in with this study a group of rats that were forced to exercise in the same way that the voluntary rats got to exercise. So they were on a routine where they were randomly exercised and for the same lengths of time and all of this other stuff. But then they did a third group where they were placed on a treadmill and they had no choice but to exercise at a steady pace and they couldn't stop or start. It just continually kept going. And then the last group was sedentary. They didn't get to do any type of exercise. So then the next day, they put the rats in an unfamiliar maze-like cage designed to determine their level of anxiety and confidence. And supposedly, if the rats went into a dark corner and hid, then they were full of anxiety and stress. But if they went into lighted areas and went around the maze, then they were confident and stress-free. The rats that were forced to either completely run on the treadmill the whole time or sedentary all went and found a dark place to hide. Where the other 2 groups, the ones that did more along their normal routines, moved around with confidence and they didn't show any anxiety. Well, the conclusion to the exercise is exercise is good for you and it relieves stress. The study said they couldn't understand why the forced treadmill rats showed sign of anxiety, at least in the rats. Even forced exercise is good, is what they said. So, do you think this is a valid study?
I just want to go
What does
hide
the
from
audience
listening
think?
to it.
Well, okay. So valid is a different question than if their conclusions are correct. I think it's an interesting study, but it's rats, so you can't ask them what they're thinking. You can't actually ask them what they're feeling. So you're using a proxy of, okay, if they go hide in a dark corner, then they're
Okay.
anxious. If they
Here
don't,
comes the scientist.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All I'm saying is, I think it's interesting, and it's probably going to spawn a whole bunch of other studies. My real question is somebody doing this in humans, which I think they are starting to, because then you can actually ask people about what they feel.
I think this is an
I would have
excellent.
to say,
Let me interrupt. I think this is an excellent point to pause for a second and ask our listeners, what do you think? Is forced exercise good for you or bad for you? Please use comments below.
all I know is I can feel what the rats on the treadmill that are nonstop are feeling, and I would go hide in a corner too, because that would be stressful. So the fact that the scientists couldn't understand why the rats that had to exercise the whole time were stressed, it's like, really? You couldn't have put that 2 and 2 together?
This reminds me of a funny video reel I've seen. It's pretty consistent. Just, you have those pets that are overweight and they put them on the forced exercise program. They have a moving treadmill and they're enclosed in a kind of glass box just to keep them moving. So the ground's constantly moving underneath them. So these dogs are resilient. They found a way to stand around in the corner and just have one paw that just goes on the treadmill. I was like, whoa, this is genius. There's a dog, really overweight dog, and it couldn't walk. Like, it was at a point where it just could not even walk on a treadmill. So they filled it up with water, and it was the ground moving underwater. So the dog figured out how to float. I'm like, oh my goodness, this is resilient, smart dog. So when you put intelligent species in a very undesired situation, I think we can get creative with solutions if we don't want to do what is put before us.
Oh yeah, Brian can come up with the most creative excuses why he doesn't want to go for that walk. Am I right?
I don't need a creative excuse.
He just
I
says
just
no.
say no.
Yeah. It's interesting though, because the two groups of rats, the ones that had total control over their exercise and the ones that were forced to exercise but in a natural pattern, as the ones who did have control, they were both apparently fine with it. But when you force animals or humans to do things they don't want to do for a prolonged period of time with no break, it's just continual, well, that would stress me out too.
I
Because you
think
don't know when it's going to end. You don't know if you're going to get a break.
at this point, it's not stress, it is duress at that
Yeah.
point. I mean, it's actively
Yeah.
bringing harm physically and mentally. Imagine if you're so closed in a room and the floor just starts moving. I mean, I would have emotional trauma. I would need therapy for forever. Like you're stuck. You have to do this. Why would I want to put myself in that position voluntarily? No thanks.
And even though it's rats, I think it speaks to when you're set a regiment of doing something that you enjoy doing or would naturally do, then that does show that it is less stressful. It does help relieve the stress. But if you're doing something that you don't enjoy and you have to keep doing it, you're not going to do that, and that exercise becomes a four-letter word.
Agree.
It's interesting. They actually have done a Swiss study with people, not rats, and they measured their burnout. So using a very popular burnout scale. And then they divided them into groups. One group had to do some kind of exercise at work. I think they were just walking. The other group didn't. And what they found was in the group that was in that exercise, it was kind of forced exercise in the sense that the whole group did it together. So they did kind of have to go, peer pressure. They found that their stress and burnout was only relieved, it only went down if they already enjoyed exercise. So the people that were in that group that were kind of forced to exercise, who didn't have a positive mindset on exercise, their burnout and their stress wasn't helped. So there's the human corollary.